The first sound in our new home wasn't the joyful laughter of my wife, Sarah, echoing off the vaulted ceilings, or the satisfying thud of the last moving box hitting the marble floor. It was the sound of my soul quietly whimpering as I hefted the welcome basket. It had been left on the granite countertop of our new kitchen island, a passive-aggressive Trojan horse sent from the Gilded Groves Homeowners Association. "Oh, look, honey, Prosecco!" Sarah chirped, already mentally arranging phantom furniture in the cavernous living room. She was in heaven. We were standing in a multi-million-dollar testament to the fact that I'd just sold my logistics software company, Pronto, for a sum of money that still felt like a typo. Sarah had picked this place in Scottsdale, Arizona, for its pristine environment and good schools. I was beginning to suspect it was a beautifully landscaped open-air asylum. The Prosecco was lukewarm, flanked by crackers that looked like compressed sawdust. But the real prize, the crown jewel of this welcoming charade, was nestled underneath. It was a 3-ring binder, white, 3 inches thick, and heavier than a server rack power supply. The gold-embossed lettering on the front read, "The Gilded Groves Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC and Rs." "What's that?" Sarah asked, drifting back into the kitchen. "I think it's the owner's manual for our house," I said, dropping it onto the counter with a loud thwack. The sound echoed in the empty space. "Or maybe a peace treaty. It's hard to tell." I flipped it open out of morbid curiosity. The table of contents was longer than my company's last SEC filing. There were sections on mailboxes, approved shades of black only, driveway composition, no unapproved aggregate, and a particularly terrifying subsection titled Permissible Flora and Fauna. "Listen to this," I said, my voice laced with the kind of dread usually reserved for reading a new terms of service agreement from a tech giant. Section 14, subsection C, paragraph 2. All non-native decorative lawn statuary, hereafter referred to as gnomes, must not exceed a height of 12 inches and must be positioned no less than 36 inches from any public walkway. Sarah laughed. "It's quaint. It's just to keep the neighborhood looking nice." "Quaint." "Sarah, I've read server farm compliance manuals that were more forgiving than this. There's a whole chapter on approved holiday lawn ornamentation. Apparently, an inflatable Santa is a Class B violation, punishable by a fine, and, I'm pretty sure, public shaming in the monthly newsletter. I think I've accidentally moved into a low-security prison where the wardens are pathologically obsessed with garden gnomes. My background is in systems optimization. For 15 years, I ate, slept, and breathed logistics. My entire life was dedicated to finding the fastest, most efficient way to get something from point A to point B. I built a company on the principle that bureaucracy and inefficiency were the enemies of progress. And now, my wife had, with the best of intentions, moved me into the global headquarters of both. This place wasn't a system to be optimized. It was a labyrinth of arbitrary rules designed by people with too much time on their hands. And, as the sole owner of a 9-figure bank account, too much time was a commodity I was suddenly flush with. I just preferred to spend mine doing literally anything other than measuring the distance between a ceramic dwarf and a sidewalk. Sarah kissed my cheek, oblivious to my existential crisis. "It'll be fine, Rick. It's our dream house. Now, are you going to help me decide if the sectional goes here or over here?" I stared at the binder. Somewhere in this quiet, beige-colored suburb, a tyrant was watching, waiting for me to plant an unapproved petunia. The game had already begun, and I didn't even know the rules. Or rather, I had the rules, all several hundred pages of them. A few weeks drifted by in a haze of unpacking and awkward waves to neighbors who all seemed to be watering their lawns at the exact same preordained time. My new role with the corporation that had acquired Pronto was strategic consultant, which was a fancy way of saying they paid me a fortune to sit in board meetings and remind them why they'd bought my company in the first place. This required frequent, often last-minute trips to the main office in downtown Phoenix and to the sprawling data centers out in the desert. That's where the dream of suburban tranquility slammed head-on into the reality of the Loop 101 freeway at 8:30 a.m. It was a parking lot, a river of red taillights flowing into a stagnant sea of commuter misery. I was stewing in my brand-new Tesla, a marvel of electric engineering reduced to a very expensive, air-conditioned box. And I was going to be late. Efficiency, optimization. These weren't just business buzzwords for me. They were a philosophy. And this traffic was a philosophical affront. It was an idiotic brute force system of moving one person at a time in a 2-ton metal cage. As I sat there, fuming, a shadow passed overhead. I looked up. It was a news helicopter, a sleek little bird floating effortlessly above our terrestrial purgatory. It moved with a purpose and grace that our gridlocked snake of cars could only dream of. And that's when the light bulb didn't just go on. It exploded in a supernova of inspiration. I wasn't solving the problem. I was in the problem. The solution wasn't a better car. The solution was to get out of the system entirely. The solution was to go above. That evening, I found Sarah sketching out plans for a koi pond in the backyard. She had a glass of wine in one hand and a look of serene contentment on her face. I felt like a wolf about to introduce a flock of sheep to the concept of air freight. "Honey," I said, my voice filled with the messianic zeal of a man who has just discovered fire. I solved the traffic problem. Sarah looked up, a wary glint in her eyes. "Oh, God. You didn't buy a monster truck, did you? Brenda from next door sent over a pamphlet about vehicle size restrictions. It was very detailed." "Brenda?" "The lady with the intense garden. HOA president, I think she said. She seems nice." "I'm sure she is," I said, dismissing the name. "But no, not a monster truck. I'm thinking bigger, more elegant. We're going above the problem, literally. I'm going to put a helipad in the backyard." Sarah stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. She blinked several times, as if trying to reboot her brain. "A helipad?" "Yep. Right over there," I said, pointing to a large, unused patch of grass near the back wall. "It's not a toy, it's a tool. An efficiency tool. I can be downtown in 15 minutes. The data center in 20. No traffic, no stress. It's the perfect solution." "You want to land a whirly-bird next to the koi pond I haven't even installed yet?" Her voice was a squeak. "Rick, did you read the binder?" "I skimmed the section on birdhouses," I said confidently. "How different can it be?" She just shook her head and took a very, very large sip of her wine. "You need to talk to Brenda. I'm a reasonable guy. I believe in communication and direct approaches, so I decided to be a good neighbor. I got Brenda's number from Sarah and called to make an appointment. An appointment to discuss a home improvement project with my next-door neighbor." The absurdity was already palpable. Her full name was Brenda Lee von Hessington, a name that sounded like it came with its own coat of arms and a small European principality. I found her exactly where you'd expect to find her, in her garden. It wasn't just a garden. It was a horticultural masterpiece. Roses bloomed in colors I didn't know existed. The lawn was an impossible, uniform shade of emerald green, so perfect it looked like it had been installed by Pixar animators. Brenda Lee herself was wearing pristine white gardening gloves, khaki slacks with a knife-edge crease, and a sun hat that could have provided shade for a small family. She was snipping at a rose bush with the delicate, terrifying precision of a bomb disposal expert. "Mr. Martinez," she said without turning around. Her voice was crisp and cool. Rick, please, I said, trying to inject some friendly neighbor vibe into the proceedings. Thanks for seeing me. I have 17 minutes before I need to fertilize my azaleas. What is it? Okay, so much for friendly. I decided to stick to logic. It was, after all, my native tongue. As you know, my work requires a lot of travel around the Phoenix area, I began, gesturing vaguely towards the city. The traffic can be a significant impediment to productivity. She made a non-committal sound, still focused on her rose. So I've come up with a practical solution to optimize my commute. I'm planning on installing a small private helipad in my backyard for business use. The snipping stopped. Slowly, she turned to face me. Her smile was a perfect, blood-red slash in her powdered face, but it didn't come anywhere near her cold, calculating eyes. A helipad, she repeated, tasting the word as if it were a cheap wine. That's right. It would be a state-of-the-art whisper-quiet model. Limited use, business hours only, purely for practical transportation. I gave her my best, most reassuring, I'm a fellow captain of industry smile. Mr. Martinez, she said, her voice dropping into a register of profound disappointment. We are a community of tranquility and terrestrial elegance. That is from page 1, section 2 of your CC and Rs. I understand that, and I think a state-of-the-art helicopter is pretty elegant. It's a marvel of engineering. It's a flying lawnmower, she declared, her smile vanishing. It's noisy, it's vulgar, and it is utterly out of the question. The rotor wash would be catastrophic for the pollen distribution, and it would disturb the hummingbirds. I stared at her. The hummingbirds. I was pretty sure I had seen a coyote trotting down the street with a neighbor's fluffy white poodle in its mouth just last week. The local ecosystem was clearly more Mad Max than Snow White. The hummingbirds, I suspected, could handle themselves. Brenda, I said, trying one last time, this is a legitimate business need. This conversation is over, Mr. Martinez, she said, turning back to her roses. The answer is no. Now, if you'll excuse me, my azaleas are waiting. As I walked away, I felt a strange new sensation. It was the feeling of an immovable object meeting an unstoppable force. And I had a sinking feeling that in this neighborhood, the immovable object was armed with a very, very thick rulebook. My conversation with Queen Brenda went about as well as a vegan at a Texas barbecue, but I wasn't deterred. I'd built $1 billion company by routing around obstacles. An HOA president with a foliage fetish was just another type of firewall. A biological one. My new strategy was simple. Get all the official city permits lined up so fast that by the time she tried to stop me with her binder of doom, I'd be shielded by a mountain of municipal paperwork. I found a contractor named Gus. He was everything Brenda wasn't. Grizzled, sun-beaten, and looked like he'd been wrestling rocks for a living since birth. His dusty Ford F-150 was a beautiful scar on the pristine asphalt of my new neighborhood. I walked him to the backyard and showed him the plans I'd had drawn up. Gus looked at the blueprints, then at the spot I'd picked out. Then his eyes drifted over the low wall separating my property from Brenda's horticultural kingdom next door. He let out a long, slow sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 30 years of Scottsdale construction projects. You talked to her, right? He asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. The Von Hessington woman? I did, I said. She mentioned hummingbirds. Gus squinted at the sun, then looked back at me. Son, let me tell you something. 2 years ago, a fellow over on Carnation Court, some tech millionaire like yourself, tried to install a satellite dish that was 6 inches larger than the approved diameter. 6 inches. He paused for dramatic effect, pulling a worn-out bandana from his back pocket to wipe his brow. By the time Brenda was done with him, he'd been fined for unauthorized dish size, unapproved coaxial cable color, and visual pollution. The stress gave him shingles. He sold his house and moved to a yurt in Flagstaff. They say he's weaving baskets now. Very happy. A satellite dish, I repeated, dumbfounded. She is the final boss of HOAs, Gus continued, his eyes twinkling with a strange mix of fear and admiration. And this helipad. Son, this is like walking into her throne room, spitting on the crown jewels and asking if she can validate your parking. There was a long silence as I processed this dire prophecy. Gus just stood there, watching me, waiting for me to fold. He probably had a yurt salesman on speed dial. So, I said finally, a slow grin spreading across my face. You'll take the job? Gus stared at me for a moment. Then a matching grin cracked his leathery face. It was the look of a man who appreciated chaos. It'll cost you extra, he said. I call it the combat pay clause, and for that price, I get a front row seat. I want to be here, with a cold beer in my hand when you tell her the concrete is getting poured. Deal, I said, shaking his calloused hand. The war had officially begun. And now I had an army. A one-man army, granted, but he had a cement mixer. That weekend, I declared war on the binder. Armed with a bottle of Macallan 18 and a fresh legal pad, I barricaded myself in my new home office. Sarah called it my crazy room. And she wasn't entirely wrong. I dissected that HOA covenant page by page, searching for the one crack in Brenda's fortress of rules. It was a masterpiece of suburban legalese. A document so dense with prohibitions it was a miracle anyone could breathe in the gilded groves without violating a bylaw. But after hours of searching, I found it. It was beautiful in its vagueness. Section 22, paragraph F. Homeowners may erect ancillary structures for the purpose of private transportation, provided such structures adhere to all city and county building codes. Helicopters weren't mentioned. Not once. The original authors in 1982 were probably more concerned with people parking their Winnebagos on the lawn. They couldn't have possibly conceived of one of their residents commuting via the sky. It was the legal equivalent of a forgotten backdoor in a piece of legacy software, and I was about to exploit the hell out of it. My strategy solidified. Speed. I would move so fast on the official city permits, the surveys, the engineering reports, that the HOA wouldn't have time to react. I would build a wall of approved, stamped, and notarized municipal documents so high that Brenda's binder couldn't get over it. The first move was to get the land surveyed. It was the first official act of war, the modern equivalent of planting a flag on enemy territory. I called Gus. The surveyors would be there Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for suburban warfare. The surveyors, two young guys in fluorescent vests, arrived precisely at 9 a.m. They started setting up their tripod, a harmless piece of equipment that, in the Gilded Groves, was apparently the harbinger of the apocalypse. They hadn't even driven the first stake into the ground when it happened. A silent, white behemoth rolled to a stop at the edge of my property. It was a Mercedes Sprinter van, the kind people use to convert into luxury campers, but this one was pristine, sterile, and blindingly white. It parked directly where the surveyors needed to place their laser transit. And behind the wheel, sitting perfectly upright, was Brenda Lee von Hessington. She was knitting. I walked across my lawn, which I was suddenly hyper-aware might be a quarter-inch too high. "Brenda, can I help you?" I called out. She didn't even look at me. She just continued her rhythmic click-clacking of needles. I got closer to the driver's side window. It was closed tight. "Brenda, you're blocking my surveyors," I said, trying to keep my voice even. In response, she slowly raised a small, laminated card and pressed it against the inside of the window. In neat block letters, it read, You are in violation of my peace and tranquility. Please communicate via email. I stared at the card. I looked at her, knitting away in her hermetically sealed van. I looked at the baffled surveyors. This woman had ascended to a level of passive aggression I had previously thought was only theoretical. And then she picked up her phone. 10 minutes later, a Scottsdale PD cruiser rolled up. Out stepped 2 officers. The first was Officer Miller, a man in his late 50s with a mustache that had clearly seen things. He had the weary, resigned posture of a man who had answered one too many calls about unapproved wind chimes. The second was Officer Davis, young, eager, and with a haircut so sharp you could probably use it to open mail. Miller sighed, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The knitting champion in a van, the confused surveyors, me. "All right, folks, what seems to be the problem here?" Before I could speak, Brenda cracked her window exactly 1 inch. "Officer," she said, her voice dripping with practiced victimhood. "They are surveying, with a tripod. It's a very aggressive piece of equipment, and they're on the public easement. I have a feeling they are in violation." "A feeling!" I burst out. "Officer, I'm the homeowner. This is my property. These are my licensed surveyors, and they have a work order. She is blocking them with her van." Officer Miller trudged over to her window. "Ma'am, is this your property you're parked on?" "The easement is community property," she sniffed, "which, as president of the Homeowners Association, I am sworn to defend from all incursions, real or perceived." Miller just stared at her. He turned to me and lowered his voice. "Is this going to be a regular thing?" "I'm starting to get that feeling, yes," I said. What followed was a 30-minute masterclass in bureaucratic obstruction. Brenda quoted imaginary bylaws. Miller quoted actual vehicle and traffic laws. Davis just looked back and forth between them like he was watching a tennis match. Finally, faced with the threat of a parking ticket, a mark of public shame no Gilded Groves resident could endure, Brenda started her van, gave me one last look of pure venom, and glided away. The battle was won, but the cop's parting words were ominous. "Son," Miller said, shaking his head, "good luck. You're gonna need it." The survey was my first victory, and it felt good. The official report confirmed what I already knew. There was more than enough room for the helipad. It also confirmed something else, a tiny little footnote about property lines that I filed away in the back of my mind for later. For now, it was time to press the advantage. Brenda's next move was more formal. A thick, cream-colored envelope appeared in my officially approved mailbox. It was from the HOA board, which was like saying it was from Brenda's personal stationery. It was a notice to cease and desist all unapproved landscaping and construction. It was a work of art, full of intimidating legal jargon and citing bylaws about retaining walls and fish ponds, none of which had anything to do with a helipad. It was a scare tactic, a beautifully typed, grammatically perfect scare tactic. I used it as a coaster. The morning after the letter arrived, I discovered Brenda had escalated to botanical warfare. Right in the center of the freshly surveyed square, marked out with little orange flags, was a new addition. Someone had, in the dead of night, planted a dozen garish, bright pink petunias. They were an affront to the carefully curated desert landscaping of my yard. Next to them was a small, hand-painted sign on a popsicle stick. It read, "Give peace and quiet a chance." I had to admire her dedication. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was performance art. But I could play that game too. I called Gus. "Gus, I have a delicate job for you," I said. "It involves some light gardening." An hour later, one of Gus's burliest crew members, a guy named Hector, who looked like he could bench press a smart car, was on his hands and knees, carefully digging up the petunias. He transplanted them into a lovely terracotta pot Gus had brought. Then, per my instructions, he hand-delivered the pot to Brenda's front porch. Tucked into the soil was a small card, on which I had written a note. "Brenda," it read, "thanks for the lovely starter plants. I had no idea you were so supportive of the helipad beautification project. Your commitment to community aesthetics is an inspiration. You're a true leader. Best, Rick." I watched from my window as she opened her front door and saw the pot. Her back went rigid. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel the waves of pure, unadulterated rage radiating across the lawn. The petunia offensive had been successfully repelled. Returning her petunias was like throwing gasoline on a bonfire. My phone rang less than an hour later. It was a pre-recorded message announcing an emergency session of the Gilded Groves HOA to be held that evening at the community clubhouse. The agenda: to discuss urgent matters pertaining to unapproved construction and the preservation of community tranquility. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. The clubhouse looked like a crate and barrel catalog had thrown up inside it. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige chairs. The entire HOA board was seated at a long table at the front. It was Brenda and 4 other people who all had the same vacant, pleasant expression of hostages who had long since accepted their fate. This wasn't a meeting, it was a show trial, and I was the guest of honor. I came prepared. I had my city permit applications, my surveyor's report, and a slick PowerPoint presentation on the economic benefits and low noise profile of the Sikorsky S-76 helicopter. I talked about decibel levels and property values. I used charts. When I was done, Brenda stood up and walked to the podium. She didn't have a PowerPoint. She had something better. Fear. "Thank you, Mr. Martinez, for that presentation," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Now I'd like to present the board with a more realistic picture." She proceeded to hold up a series of grainy, printed-out photos she'd clearly found on the first page of a Google Images search for helicopter crash. Then, she pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker and played a sound clip. It was the deafening whop 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 of what sounded like a Huey from the Vietnam War. "This," she said gravely, "is the sound of our tranquility being shattered. This is the sound of our property values plummeting. This is the sound of fear." The board members looked horrified. I wanted to scream that I was buying a modern civilian aircraft, not strafing the neighborhood, but I was never given the chance. "Therefore," Brenda announced, her voice ringing with triumph, "I propose an emergency amendment to our sacred CC and Rs, Amendment 114B, a full and total prohibition on the ownership, operation, or landing of any and all vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, aircraft within the Gilded Groves." She called for a vote. It was unanimous. 4 hands shot up in perfect, terrified unison with hers. She turned to me, a smug, victorious smile plastered on her face. "So, Mr. Martinez, as you can see, the community has spoken. There will be no helicopters in the Gilded Groves, effective immediately upon filing with the county clerk." My heart sank. She'd outmaneuvered me. She'd literally changed the law. But then, a flicker of hope. A detail. "When do you file it with the county?" I asked, keeping my voice as level as I could. Brenda's smile widened. "My husband, a retired patent attorney, will be taking it down personally. Tomorrow morning. First thing." My mind raced. It was 4 p.m. First thing tomorrow morning meant 8 a.m. at the earliest. That gave me a window. A 17-hour window. I met her smug gaze and gave a small, polite nod. "I see. Thank you for the clarification." I walked out of the beige clubhouse, my mind already spinning. It wasn't over. Brenda had won the battle, but she hadn't won the war. She'd given me a deadline. And as any tech guy knows, a deadline isn't a wall. It's a launch date. The moment the clubhouse door swished shut behind me, the polite, defeated neighbor persona dissolved. I was already in my car, engine running, before the first of Brenda's board member sycophants had a chance to ask her if they had voted correctly. My fingers flew across my phone's screen. I hit a single name in my favorites list, Mac. Mac was my pilot, an ex-Air Force guy whose pulse probably wouldn't spike if he were landing a C-130 on an aircraft carrier in a hurricane. He was the calm, steady hand I needed for the glorious, beautiful, and deeply insane idea that was rapidly crystallizing in my mind. He answered on the second ring. "Pronto," he said, still using the call sign from my old company. His voice was as calm and flat as a desert runway. "Mac, what's your ETA to Scottsdale from the hangar?" I asked, pulling out onto the main road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Standard flight, about 45 minutes, Rick. What's up? Did the board meeting go well?" He knew about my little project. He thought it was hilarious. "The window of opportunity is closing," I said, the words coming out fast and clipped. Fast. They passed a new rule. It's not official yet, but it will be tomorrow morning. I need you to file a flight plan. Destination? My house? ETA? Let's say 1 hour. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a confused pause. A calculating one. Mac was processing the new mission parameters. 1 hour, copy that, he said. But the pad isn't finished. Gus's guys just finished the rebar grid this afternoon. It's just dirt and steel, Rick. Not exactly a regulation landing zone. A grin, the first genuine one I'd had all day, spread across my face. I looked in my rearview mirror. The Gilded Groves community sign, with its tasteful, elegant font, receded into the distance. "The pad is no longer the primary landing zone, Mac," I said, a giddy sense of impending chaos bubbling up in my chest. "The primary landing zone has been compromised. I'll call you back with coordinates for Plan B." "Plan B standing by," he replied, without a hint of surprise in his voice. God, I loved that man. I hung up, my heart hammering. I had a pilot, I had a helicopter, and I had a 17-hour window. Now I just needed a place to land. My next call was to the man on the ground, my co-conspirator in this suburban psychodrama. I called Gus. "Gus, it's go time," I said, the moment he answered. "Let me guess," his gravelly voice came through the speaker. "The meeting didn't end with them presenting you with a key to the city." "They passed the rule, didn't they?" "They did. A brand new bespoke anti-Rick Martinez amendment. But it's not official until tomorrow morning. So I'm bringing the bird in. Tonight." There was a long silence on Gus's end. I could practically hear him processing the sheer, beautiful audacity of it. "Are you insane?" he finally asked. But there was a distinct lack of judgment in his tone. It was more a question of genuine, professional curiosity. "Land on what? My guys just cleared out. It's a pit full of steel rods." "That's the beauty of it. We're not using the pit," I said. "I just need you to do me a favor. Get your guys out of there. Make sure all your equipment is clear. And maybe set up some of those orange traffic cones around the perimeter of my property line. For safety." Another pause. This one was shorter. It was followed by a deep, rumbling chuckle that sounded like rocks tumbling down a hillside. "You're gonna do it," he said, a note of pure, unadulterated glee in his voice. "You're really gonna land that thing in her crabgrass." "I haven't decided on the exact coordinates yet," I said, "but let's just say I'm exploring all available options." "I'll get my guys out of there in 20 minutes, he said. "And Rick, I'm canceling my dinner plans. I wouldn't miss this for the world. I'll get my lawn chair." I ended the call and drove. By the time I pulled back through the gates of the gilded groves, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. It felt like the calm before the storm. My storm. Sarah met me at the door, her face a mask of anxiety. "How did it go?" she asked. "They said no," I said. "Oh, Rick, I'm sorry. I told you." "It's fine," I said, walking past her and heading to the back patio. "I'm moving to Plan B." "What's Plan B?" she asked, following me. I just smiled. "Plan B is a surprise." 45 minutes later, I was standing in my backyard, phone in hand, scanning the twilight sky. Sarah was inside, pacing back and forth in the kitchen, refusing to watch what she called the inevitable escalation. Gus had been true to his word. His equipment was gone, and a neat line of orange safety cones now marked the edges of my property, giving the whole scene a bizarre, official-looking feel. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump in the distance. It was a sound that was about to become very, very unpopular in this neighborhood. It was the sound of progress. It grew steadily louder, a heartbeat in the sky. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who heard it. The back door of the house next door slid open with a violent shriek. Brenda Lee von Hessington marched out onto her patio. She was no longer the calm, collected garden queen. She was a woman on the brink. Her eyes, wide with fury, scanned the sky. She saw the approaching helicopter. Then her gaze snapped to me, standing alone in my yard. A look of wild, desperate triumph crossed her face. She had a plan. A crazy, brilliant, human shield kind of plan. She marched, with the righteous fury of a warrior queen defending her homeland, directly to the one place she knew the helicopter was supposed to land. She strode onto the half-excavated patch of dirt and rebar that was my helipad, her sensible pumps sinking slightly into the soft earth. She planted her feet, crossed her arms, and glared up at the sky. But she wasn't done. She disappeared into her house for a moment and re-emerged carrying two enormous, heavy-looking ceramic pots. They were her prize-winning roses, the ones she'd been tending to when I first met her. With a grunt of effort, she hoisted them onto the rebar grid, one on each side of her, like floral cannons guarding a fortress. She had become a human and horticultural shield. It was her last stand, and I had to admit, it was magnificent. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was Mac. The helicopter, a sleek dark blue Sikorsky S-76, was now circling overhead, its floodlight cutting a sharp cone through the deepening dusk. "Rick?" Mac's voice came through my earpiece, as calm as ever, but with a new edge of urgency. "I've got eyes on the landing zone. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked, my eyes fixed on Brenda's defiant silhouette. "There appears to be an angry woman standing in the middle of it, with potted plants." "Yeah, that's the HOA president," I said. The wind from the rotor wash was starting to pick up, whipping at my shirt. "Can you wave her off? Maybe a little dip of the nose?" "Negative, Rick," Mac said. "She's shaking a binder at us. I don't think she's going to move. We can't land. It's unsafe. Aborting to the alternate airfield." "No, hold on," I yelled over the noise. This was it. The moment of truth. Brenda stood there, smug and immovable, a human roadblock. She had won. She had beaten my logic, my money, and my helicopter. And then my eyes drifted. I looked past Brenda, past the dirt pit and the rebar. My gaze swept to the east, to her lawn, her perfect, emerald green, pudding green smooth, award-winning lawn. It was a vast, inviting, exquisitely flat expanse of glorious green, a carpet of natural perfection stretching out under the twilight sky. And then the footnote from the surveyor's report clicked into place in my brain. The tiny little detail I had filed away. The ace I didn't even know I had up my sleeve. My phone was still pressed to my ear. "Mac, you still have my property map on your GPS?" "Affirmative," he replied. "Why?" "Okay, see the designated landing pad?" "The one with the lady on it? Yeah, I see it." "Okay." I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "Now look about 50 feet to the east of that. You see that immaculate stretch of grass? The one that looks like God's personal billiard table?" There was a pause. Mac was probably reorienting his view. "That's the neighbor's yard, Rick. I can't land there." And this was it. The checkmate. The beautiful, logical, karmic checkmate. "No, Mac," I said, a massive, world-beating grin spreading across my face. "That's not the neighbor's yard. According to the official survey Gus just did, due to a clerical error back in 1982 when the lots were first drawn, that 10,000 square foot patch of heaven she's been obsessively caring for, it's technically, legally, and officially on my property line. She's been mowing my lawn for 20 years. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, broken only by the whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of the rotors. Finally, Mac's voice came back, laced with sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "Are you serious?" I looked at Brenda, standing proudly on my useless patch of dirt, and then at the pristine green landing strip she had so graciously prepared for me. "Plan B is a go, Mac," I said, my voice ringing with triumph. "Bring it down, gently." The change was instantaneous. The powerful Sikorsky, which had been holding a steady pattern, suddenly banked hard to the east. Brenda's smug expression, illuminated by the chopper's spotlight, faltered. It morphed into confusion, then into a dawning, sputtering look of pure, unadulterated horror as she realized the aircraft's new trajectory. Her head whipped around. She saw me, standing on my patio, giving her a polite little wave. She looked at her lawn, her life's work, her masterpiece. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Mac brought the helicopter down with the skill of a man painting on a canvas. The descent was controlled but swift. The rotor wash, which had been a stiff breeze, became a localized hurricane. The first casualty was a flock of her prize-winning petunias near the patio. They simply vaporized into a pink mist. A wrought iron patio set, complete with an umbrella, lifted off the ground for a brief, glorious moment of flight before cartwheeling into her swimming pool with a tremendous splash. And the binder. Oh, the binder! She had been holding it like a shield. The wind caught it, ripping it from her grasp. For a moment it held together. Then it exploded. Hundreds of pages, covenants, conditions, and restrictions were sucked up into the vortex, fluttering and scattering across the entire Gilded Grove's neighborhood like bureaucratic confetti at a very, very weird parade. The helicopter's skids touched down on Brenda Lee von Hessington's perfect zoysia grass, with a bump so gentle it was almost an insult. The turbines began to whine down. The great blades slowly spun to a stop. It was over. It was sitting there, a magnificent, multi-ton monument to my victory, right in the middle of her former pride and joy. I took a leisurely stroll across my yard and on to the now liberated territory. The side door of the helicopter slid open with a pneumatic hiss. In the distance, I heard a familiar sound. Not a helicopter, but a siren. It died as a Scottsdale PD cruiser pulled up to the curb. Officers Miller and Davis got out, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Gus, my contractor, was standing on the street next to his truck, not with a beer, but with his phone up, recording the whole thing. He was slow clapping. Brenda was staggering towards me, her perfect hair now a wild mess, her face streaked with dirt, and, I think, potting soil. "My lawn!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. My award-winning zoysiagrass, you maniac, you animal! Officer Miller walked up to me, his weary gaze shifting from the helicopter to the screaming Brenda, to the lawn furniture floating in the pool. He didn't look angry. He looked impressed. "Let me guess," he said, rubbing his mustache. "The hummingbirds were disturbed?" "You have no idea, officer," I said with a sigh. "It was a whirlwind. By the way," I added, gesturing towards the apoplectic woman in front of me, "she's trespassing on my property." Miller just shook his head, a tiny glimmer of a smile playing on his lips. He looked at his watch. "Son, I'm taking a 30-minute coffee break, down the street. Try to have this, whatever this is, resolved by the time I get back." He and a stunned-looking Davis got back in their car and drove slowly away. Brenda just stood there, speechless now, just pointing a trembling finger from the helicopter to me and back again, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The war was over. I had achieved air superiority. The next day, the Gilded Groves was quiet, eerily quiet. The helicopter was gone, flown out at dawn before most of the residents had their first sip of fair trade coffee. But its ghost remained. In the center of Brenda's lawn, my lawn, were two long, deep impressions in the grass. Her prize-winning zoysiagrass now looked like the site of a very exclusive, very brief rock festival. The story, I would later learn, had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, whispered over bridge games and pickleball matches. By noon, I was a legend. 3 different anonymous thank you notes appeared in my mailbox, one tucked inside a seed catalog. Late that afternoon, my doorbell rang. It was Brenda. She wasn't the woman I had met in the garden or the shrieking fury from the night before. She looked deflated. Her power suit was slightly rumpled. Her hair, while still impeccably coiffed, seemed to have lost some of its structural integrity. She looked defeated. "Martinez," she said. It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was an acknowledgement. "Brenda," I replied, opening the door wider. I gave her my most charming smile. "Nice of you to drop by. Can I offer you a neighborly cup of coffee? Or perhaps some Prosecco? I have some—" She flinched. "Fix my lawn," she said, her voice flat and devoid of its usual tyrannical authority. "Restore it to its previous condition. And the amendment. Amendment 114B. It gets lost at the county clerk's office. A clerical error?" I leaned against the door frame, enjoying this a little too much. "And—" She took a deep breath, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "And we work out a flight schedule. 2 landings, 2 takeoffs, per week, during normal business hours, no weekends, no holidays." She paused, then added the most important part. "And you will never, ever speak of the 1982 survey error to another living soul." It was a total surrender. She was handing me the keys to the kingdom, or at least to its airspace. I could have just taken the deal. But an optimized system requires checks and balances. "Deal," I said, "on one condition. I'm joining the HOA's Architectural Review Committee." If I had asked for her firstborn child, she would have been less shocked. Her eyes widened, and a flash of the old Brenda returned. The committee was the source of her power, the place where she wielded her beige paint swatches like a scepter. Me, on that committee, was a fox in her henhouse. A fox with a helicopter. She stared at me for a long, tense moment. I could see the gears turning in her head, calculating the new political landscape of the Gilded Groves. Finally, with a barely perceptible twitch of her jaw, she gave a single, sharp nod. A truce had been declared. A month later, the Gilded Groves had found a new equilibrium. The helipad was finished. It was a thing of beauty, a sleek circle of reinforced concrete, professionally painted and lit. Gus had done a spectacular job. True to my word, I had hired the best and most expensive landscaping company in all of Arizona to work on Brenda's lawn. They came in with rolls of sod that looked like green velvet, and within a week, her yard was restored to its former, impossible perfection. The day the work was finished, I had my lawyer draw up the paperwork. As a gesture of goodwill, and because owning 2 lawns seemed like a violation of my own efficiency principles, I legally deeded the 10,000-square-foot patch of land back to her. It was the right thing to do. It was also a brilliant power move. Now she was tending to her own lawn again, but she knew it was only by my grace. I also attended my first architectural review committee meeting. I vetoed a proposal to ban any decorative rock that wasn't of the Sonoran desert brown family and approved a family's request for a slightly too large basketball hoop. It was a small-scale rebellion, but it felt good. This morning it was time. Time for the first official flight. As Mac spooled up the turbines, I saw Sarah watching from the kitchen window. She was shaking her head, but she was smiling. The helicopter lifted off the pad, smooth as glass. As we ascended, climbing into the bright blue Arizona sky, I looked down. My house, the neighborhood, the whole pristine, orderly world of the Gilded Groves spread out beneath me. And there, in the middle of her perfect lawn, was Brenda. She was out tending to a new batch of roses. She looked up, her hand shielding her eyes from the sun as she watched the helicopter climb. For a moment, I expected a fist shake, a glare, a hurled trowel. Instead, she just watched. And then, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. An acknowledgement. Then she turned back to her gardening. I leaned back in my seat as Mac set a course for Phoenix. The Gilded Groves was still a place with far too many rules, but now, one of those rules, the one about whose rules mattered most, was mine. The hummingbirds, for the record, seemed perfectly fine, and every now and then, when I'd see Brenda at the community mailbox, she'd give me that same curt nod. It wasn't friendship. It was something far more valuable in a place like this. It was the look of 2 Cold War superpowers who had finally and irrevocably realized the destructive capability of the other. It was respect. And in a neighborhood like the Gilded Groves, that was a whole lot better than being liked.